The next session is kind of a next step of what we have heard so far. We heard from Parag, and then we heard from the panel on go-to-market. Now what we are going to do is, let's say you had an idea, you validated it, you have a go-to-market strategy, now you need funding. So we talk about and explore those areas of what funding sources are available, how you can go after the funding sources, if you should go after the funding sources. But before that, I want to invite, I need attention of the people there to get my slide up. Before we get the panel up of the investors, I wanted to invite two people who have lived and breathed this industry for their entire life, who have given their blood, sweat, and tears to get the industry in India where we are. So the first is Muthukrishnan, Chinnasamy. Muthu, please stand up as I bring you up on stage. No, there are so many things I can say about Muthu, but I will say this. Muthu is the CEO of SFAL, which is an incubator and accelerator started by IISc and by KDM. And the reason he was selected is because he knows pretty much everything and everybody that happens in this industry. So Muthu, thank you so much. Then with Muthu, I also invite Dr. Gaurab Banerjee. And he is, I won't say unique, but he's in that minority who spent a large part of his life in the industry and then said, you know what, I'm done with it. I want to go teach people how to do things right. So he then joined IISc. Both of you, sir, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and the history of from where we started to where we are today.
Okay, good morning or good afternoon, or it's going to be very soon. Good evening. So it's a little bit profile about myself, I think. That was, maybe I'll talk why I am planned this talk. I think we listened to Parag. It was a little bit of a startup philosophy. Then I think Manoj with his panelist grounded everybody with real people. And I am going to count how many Sauravs, how many Ashish, and how many Manoj also. Because I come from an ecosystem experience, at least last 3 years. Before that, I was an entrepreneur myself. And in fact, Parag talked about seeing a lot of movies. In my fund, we also invested in a movie. I think I would like all of you go and see that movie. Some of you may have already seen. It is called Mandela. Okay, that was a movie funded by us along with Reliance. Just remember that. And by the way, it won 2 national awards this year. Okay, so I was I was joking to my wife that because he's very fond of Surya, the Tamil hero, and next time when Surya comes, you can also tell your husband also has won something similar. Okay, so it's a very interesting movie. We very interestingly we got our returns back, and very professional investment team. I was part of a fund management company earlier. So he is a Tata executive right now. So he happened to go to Bombay, and then he met with them casually in one of these hotel conversations and things like that. So this team convinced him that along with your deep tech investments, you should also do delve into, explore this movie part. And it is such a professional. In fact, we learned a lot from, I will tell you some of the issues with ESDM startups, what some of the founders are making some mistakes. And we learned a lot of those things from those probably very young ladies who was producing this movie. In fact, Reliance was the co-producer. There is another company called Why Not Films. All these companies made it, and it was supposed to be released for Tamil Nadu during Tamil Nadu Assembly election, but because of COVID, they didn't. But it became a big hit on the other platforms, and they returned the money. Okay, and they continue to return the money because it is going to be played in worldwide audience. Amazons and Netflixes are going to pay them more and more, and it's coming up. So that is just maybe a digression. So I'm going to talk about the opportunities in ESDM. I think it's really glad the organization which I belong today, SFAL itself, was an initiative by a core interest group of IISc. about 4 to 5 years back. And it is really glad we have taken that initiative to another level. I'll give you some what has happened with that. And also, a startup event like this is started by another core interest group, which is also a fantastic team, which Ruchir, Prasad, Manoj, a lot of us are part of it. You are going to hear more and more from them, and there are lots and lots of things we are working on. There are lots and lots of questions, even an academic person's question from, I think, IT Roorkee, we have answers for that. We will also talk about it even offline, but a lot of those things are getting worked out by IISc. And by the way, the governments are also helping a lot. I can speak for Government of Karnataka because I work with them. And including the Government of India, there are going to be good speakers in the afternoon session from Government of India. The lots and schemes are there, so I'm going to talk about all of that. Next slide, please. Yeah. So quickly, this is my outline. I'm going to talk SFAL in numbers and ESDM sector investment, the history, what all we did in ESDM, and the exact snapshot of ESDM today, and the contrast of ESDM, how it happens in India versus the globe, and what is the success recipe. In fact, we can confidently say how, if you consider, I think I know a few numbers which probably Parag didn't reveal. I'm telling you that he probably returned 2 to 40x to the investors. So that we know, some of you, like people like Satish, a few from investment community, we all track that. These are all can be tracked on internet also through some platforms. So they have returned close to 2 to 40x to the investors. So that means it is a real financial success story also. So we will give you, at least from our experience, the recipe for such success. And we'll also talk about where are all the opportunities, because there are a lot of investment community or investment-related community people are here, even a lot of budding entrepreneurs, already existing entrepreneurs. We are going to give this a very, very possibility talk. I think startup is all about only looking at possibilities. The impossibilities word doesn't exist in startup dictionary. Please understand that. And we'll also give you, in fact, yesterday night, I received an SMS. I think my team is also here, some of them. There was the first exit for SFAL ecosystem. We received money, okay? We received the money into our bank, actually. The exit returns in less than 24 months, we have got a return from one of our investments. I mean, that means it's a classical example that we can do that in ESDM sector, however hard it is. I can show you my SMS, the money we received in our account, and more money is yet to come, it will come, okay? And I'll tell you why ESDM segment needs, there are certain problems with respect to investment situations, so that's why we have people like Satish, and even there is a speaker going to join from UK. There is an IPV platform investment person is going to come, which is going to be an excellent session. I think I request all of you and more of you to attend that session, especially even if you miss our session. So quickly, our numbers, we are only 150 startups in the ESDM space, okay? Whether it is DPITT registered or state government registered, and we are growing at 10% annually. And we already covered, when we say coverage, SFAL have reached out to 70 to 80% of all of them in last 24 months of our operation. And we have selected, engaged, or completed 29 of them, okay? So it is like 30 out of 150, you can call it. Okay, this is engaged. But we are actually talking to everybody in terms of coverage. In fact, most of you please remember, the engaged customers are much easier to handle, and non-engaged customers which you are wanting to engage, it takes even more bandwidth. So you have to understand that. And we have, our coverage domain is semiconductor development, that is ICs, and also IP and systems related. So what we found was, I think I want to pass a minute and tell that somehow, I think, because of our, again, that technical superiority in our thinking, we think that India is going to become very good in product nation. But we can't become a product nation unless we recognize what we have done in the service sector. So India continues to remain a biggest service nation because we serve the worldwide customers. Instead of looking down upon service as almost like a third cousin, what we should look at is we should give enough importance to the service sector. So what we have done in SFAL, we even changed our policy terms. We brought the service companies who have an interest to building an IP. Okay, so we just almost graduated them from point A to point B. So that is something we need to do. We should not, if you look at it, all the big 3 EDA companies, I think Ruchir also belongs to one of them, they all came to India to serve the Indian customers. Okay, so that itself service started it. So it is very, very important that we really upgrade all the service companies. In fact, every product company has to work with the service company. If you go and look at it, whether it could be a VLSI design service, or it could be a system design service, or it's an embedded software service. So you will be measured as good, even by investors, only when you have a good ecosystem of such service providers with you. So please remember that. And we have a partner ecosystem of about 40 plus partners working with us. Some of them are in this room. I'd like to thank, there are 2 key partners we have. Of course, other than 2 EDA key partners, we have Intel and MathWorks, who really support this ecosystem to the hilt, actually. We have expected some support from them, but we have received more than that. Like that, we have built 40 plus such companies in our ecosystem. And we have a GIA, stands for Global Innovation Alliance, which is 2 companies like Applied Materials and NXP, through which we take the Indian startups to outside India, and we also support whether any startups can come from outside the country to India. And we have seen the exits. While typing this, the exit was ongoing, but actually now we can say the exit is completed because we got the money. Of course, we have to transfer the share certificate, which will happen. Okay? And these are all the domains, actually. Can you believe this? In fact, Parag touched upon how does a startup in photonics will be valued. Supposing if it is valued at 5 million here, the same photonics startup will be valued 50 million in US. The same startup, okay? The same capabilities. So that is a geography shift, actually. And we are, with all these kind of initiatives, the government and the associations like IISc, even the corporate bodies, all of them are going to bridge that gap in the next couple of decades. It will bridge eventually. Like, I think today, all of you know how Freshworks bridged, how to get listed in NASDAQ and serving the worldwide customers, how Zoho has done that. We are going to do that in ESDM. Whether we do it or not, somebody else will do it. So what is the ESDM history? I think we have to give due credit to what government did in very early days. These are all when I started in the industry. Bharat Electronics, IIT, ITI. I think most of the VLSI activity in this country actually came out of ITI R&D, right out of Bangalore, actually. Even most of the tools also they used to build there, even VLSI tools. The person who did that VLSI tools there actually went on to head the Sanyo VLSI design group. His name is Mr. Raghunathan. I think, I don't know, some of you will be too young for that, but that's what has happened. So all these enterprises have really helped. Those are all investment which we did in the last 4 decades. And if you look at the products, there were radios, then TVs came, then computers, now you know mobile phones. I think the amount of mobile phones the number of mobile phones getting manufactured in India is really almost like we are only 3rd or 4th in number. And along with that came EDA companies, the services which the big three, Siemens, Cadence, and Synopsys have done to ESDM ecosystem is enormous. I think we should always be indebted to them. I'm not saying this because this was being managed by Ruchir, but we have lived through all of that. Even today, for example, they work with SFAL companies a lot. Even today, anything we need extra, they come on their own and help us, actually. So I think this entire ecosystem, this is not just about the company. I think you can identify 10 to 20 people in these companies. They will help in every possible way. When Parag talked about networking, connecting, you have to network like hell. I think if you're an entrepreneur, if you don't know 10 people in each of these EDA companies, especially in ESDM space, then you have not done your homework. So better go and fix that. And we have IDMs, we have Fabulous. I don't know how many of you know, I think one professor asked about, even we ask this to even any Intel engineer I meet, I always ask them, have you heard about a research project called Align? See, Align is the world's first and the best, or probably not first, automatic circuit and layout synthesis project which is done by Intel. 90% of Intel engineers also don't know that. And 90% of the Intel engineers in Intel India I'm talking about, they don't know it. So that's the problem. That is the opportunity identification problem. So what they have to do is at least the remaining 10% have to figure out what is being done by this aligned project. They work with some of the 6 topmost research institutes in the world, and they have solved that automatic circuit and layout synthesis problem, which was unsolved by even the current Cadence CEO. Anirudh Devgan's PhD project was circuit synthesis. So he couldn't solve it with his PhD thesis. He tried to solve it in Cadence also. It is still unsolved, but Align is the next. So Intel engineers, as well as academic engineers, academic professors, you all have to get associated with that. Is there anything we can build one module out of that? Okay? So those kind of opportunities. So that's what we are talking about, opportunities. And believe me, anybody, Intel wants to open up. Intel is looking for these people to come and talk, actually. So even if 2 people don't talk, we go and figure out how we can make other 2 people, how do we find other 2 people. Everybody is, I mean, right from Pat Kilsinker down to the IFS team at all levels wanting to talk and find people of academic excellence or any corporate excellence to figure out how they can build their IFS ecosystem. You all know that Intel wants to really promote their factories, the fabs, but they are not there yet. Okay, whether right from Ranjit Thakur to all the IFS president, Rahul Goyal, they all visited. They had a lot of discussions with SFAL companies. That opportunity itself is close to $1 billion for Indian companies, which is untapped today. It is zero tapped. Very much there. If you're not talking to the right people, go and find somebody else in Intel to talk to the right people. There are always a lot of people. I think a few weeks back, Gurucharan Murthy, he came from Arizona. He is the one who told the ATMP OSAT just needs $50 million. It doesn't need $500 million. He says, if somebody, any corporate group also puts $50 million, there are only 8 OSAT ATMP companies in the whole world. Only 8 of them. And world needs at least 20 of them. So that means there is a gap. So Indian companies, Indian corporates, they can, it's not that it's a 500 million maybe needed later, but initially to start with, you need only 50 million. Like this, there are lots and lots of such activities are happening, whether you people know or not. And by the way, startups is always mostly about closed door. I mean, why we have less people in startups, even for events and conferences, because startups are somewhat private actually. So we don't need to be worried about whether we have a crowd or not. So startups all the time works only when 10 people come together and come up with something. Okay, I think I acquired Parag's earlier company, part of Genesis Microchip. And that we developed the bonding. Then I left Genesis Microchip, then Parag and all came with this idea of let's do something. So that was a private talk actually. So that's how everything starts. I think startup is reasonably private. It is not a crowd-based. It is not a generic, like 10,000 people or 1,000 people come together and come up with some ideas, because sometimes the 10 people will be competing with each other. So initially each 10 people have to build something, then they can collaborate. Okay, so those are all the things I would like to highlight. So I have struck out 2 things actually in this, if you look at it, because most of you can read it. We were once the strongest in semiconductor process, and we were once strongest in EDA. I don't know how many of you know, gateway design automation actually made Cadence. The 80% of the Cadence is actually, it's gateway design automation out of Noida, which was started by Mr. Prabhu Goyal, who is an Indian. So that went on to become Cadence. But we don't have, only 2 EDA startups are there in the country now. One is started by a husband and wife team, Harish and his wife in Bangalore. And there is one company called Viavia Labs, which Parag and myself were all seed investors in that. Okay, so only 2 companies. So we lost out in something. So what we are good at, which I want to leave with all of you, Indians are very good at doing one at the expense of the other. That tendency we have to stop. We have to build on A even when we want to do B. Even we did that mistake. I was hired by Texas Instruments as an EDA engineer. We did very well. We did all the PNR tools we wrote for TI. But none of us never did an EDA startup after that. Okay, we all moved to design because design was paying more money. We all chased jobs, but there is nothing wrong in it because this country has 1.4 billion people. We have to feed all of them, right? So we have to make money out of it. That's why we should never put the service sector down. We all went and did something very important now, but we have done that for a long enough. Now I can tell you, I think Qualcomm has 80 vice presidents. 80 vice presidents probably drawing more than 80 lakhs to 1.5 crores, okay? And when I want to go and form a fund, assuming that I want to form a fund and help companies, these 80 people is the target. I think you are going to listen to some people from IPV. What IPV does is there are 3,500 investors in their platform, okay? If you go and see all those 80 Qualcomm VPs, some of them may be part of the investors. Now, can we go and figure out whether all these people will be available to some needy startups who are looking for capital? So that is what actually when Ruchir told that we are going to do a lot more things in SFAL and IISc and along with governments, we are going to, I think, if you listen to Ashish told the government scheme is a reimbursement scheme, it is not an investing scheme. We were all part of the policy making inputs. We tried to give it to the government that there has to be a fund element, but government, for whatever reason, they couldn't do it. But government is saying no to it. Government saying, give some more proposals, we'll figure out how to do it. So we have to work on such proposals and build these private funds in which government participates. So those are all the things we are going to work on in the coming years. You will hear some announcements from IISc, SFAL itself, government itself. So very, very, be optimistic. I think startup is always about, if somebody is pessimistic and not conveying hope, please remove him or her from your influence circles. That is my advice. Just remove them. Maybe you can go lunch, dinner with them and all that. That is fine. But if anybody is negative, okay, just remove them from your interactions with respect to professional. That is one advice that always worked. I think we have done 20 to 30 investment even as a personally, even as a professionally, except 2 of them, everybody is doing well. So where is this question of 4% success in startup? See, if that is what the VCs and all the people publish actually. Nobody is publishing what happened to the 96%. So we as a nation, and you know, we are the most intellectually the strongest nation in the world. We will concentrate on the 96%. Okay, and then we can make it everybody successful. In fact, I can guarantee you there are 9 companies signed and agreed and working with SFAL. I'm telling you, even in a public forum, all 9 companies, we are going to make it successful. Okay, we know how to do it. All of them also, the entrepreneurs also know it, the ecosystem also knows it. You will hear hear from some of them. There are some people sitting in this room, you can catch them. We are going to make it happen. Why it is 9? Why not it is 90? Okay. We'll start actually. See, this hockey stick curve, everybody talks. Our hockey stick curve is different. It could be an ice hockey stick, or it doesn't need to be a field hockey stick, right? We can build our own hockey sticks. Because every nation is different. We can't compare ourselves with Taiwan, we can't compare ourselves with China, okay? And by the way, manufacturing is also, it is probably the lowest margin business. But we are all intellectually manufacturers. The biggest intellectual capital across the globe is with us only. By the way, when we were running fabs for TI and all, usually we hire the technicians from Taiwan, Philippines, and Vietnam. The R&D work is always done by Indians. Okay? Just remember that. So our intellectual capital, we have to make use of it. So local manufacturing is picking up, local market is picking up. Okay? I don't know whether I think all of you talked about, maybe listened about drones market. I think it is projected to be 3-4 billion. Already there is a talk about anti-drones market. I don't know how many of you are aware. That itself is worth $4 billion actually. Anti-drones means you identify drones and destroy them. Okay. That could be needed in future, right? And by the way, as we speak, 2 days back I met a company called Vyomastra. They have submitted the best proposal for anti-drones technology to national security guards. They have selected them as one of the 5 companies to supply anti-drones technology to the country, government, wherever it is. Okay. So anti-drones market. So like I think there is an abundance. Somebody said, some speaker said that there is an abundance everywhere. So you will find all kinds of opportunities. Stay in hardware, stay in ESDM. And next 1 or 2 decades is going to be, the core engineering segments will never go down. I think that's why we have to stay there. But there is not enough risk capital, which I'm going to address. How do we do it? This is our snapshot of where we are. We are 400 global capability centers, out of which good number are in ESDM. 100, we saw this. There are 50 big BDM to EMS players. I don't know whether, I know Sirma is going IPO. Okay, all of you should buy Sirma shares. Okay, it will do very well. Okay, 20 biggest ESDM design services in the country. You name it. Synapse. All even small design services company through aggregation, they are becoming bigger and bigger. Okay, 80K direct employment in VLSI sector alone. I think direct to indirect conversion is somewhere around 1.5 to 6 times. So now you count, we are creating a lot of jobs actually. That is VLSI alone. Our ESDM segment is 4 lakhs. And if you look at it, that's why I put this, I'm always an optimistic person, no fab yet. That's an opportunity actually. So you can put many fabs. There are 520 fabs across the globe actually. Maybe next 20 fabs will come here. There is no other option, okay? Taiwan, all of you know, it is very vulnerable. Entire Taiwan supply chain ecosystem is moving to Arizona, Ohio, and Texas, okay? And who has the right communication channels with USA? I think India will rank number 1. So we will be playing not just ESDM, it will be related sectors like gases, chemicals, metals, processing, everything in that ecosystem. So next 4 years, our wafer pull estimate is only 1,000 wafers. So some people will think that to produce 1,000 wafers why do we need to put up a fab? These are all the questions people are asking. Okay? But see this as an opportunity. See, opportunity comes from problem. Okay? And only 10 wafers we have pulled in the last 24 months. Okay? Out of which 6 wafers is taken by one of the company, Cyril Systems, and usually their wafer straight away gets diced in Singapore actually. It does not even come to the country. Okay? So, but all this will change. It's a massive opportunity for us. See, we convert this opportunity, when we present to the investors also, we say that, hey, we are going to do it. $70 billion is going to be our indirect, direct consumption of semiconductors by 2030. So it has to either be imported or it should be locally made, right? So that's the story we'll give, okay? And by the way, we are evaluating 2-3 GAN proposals, setting up in India, at most advanced stages of closing the funding, okay? So that's all happening. So I'll give you now the contrast. What is the situation? Is it a good, bad, and enough? There is an India fabulous venture. They have raised so far 40 crore cumulative capital from 2012 to 2018. That's 6 years. We don't know what they did last 4 years. We can figure that out also. They've diluted 40% of their holding, but their valuation is increased by 10x, which is good. There are only 2 investors. See, this is the very, very important ratio an entrepreneur has to be aware of. We call it annual revenue to cumulative capital raised. This is the only ratio you should make it come closer to 1. The moment you keep this as 1, people like Satish, everybody will search for you and give money. Okay? You just do this math actually. What is your annual revenue over what is the cumulative capital raised? That number should be reaching 1 in n number of years. That n number of years varies for software companies, ESDM companies. Even within ESDM, maybe an EDA company will do differently, an IP company will do differently, a product company will do differently. By the way, these are all universal facts. Okay, you can't. The moment you do this, you will see you don't go to investors. Investors will come to you. Cosmic Circuits, every trip Liputan came to India, he begged Gani to invest into Cosmic. Just remember that. Okay? Gani never wanted money from outside world. The Cosmic Circuits founder and CEO. Every time. So he had 450 IPs at platinum, gold, silver level, qualified in all the fabs. And he was getting revenue out of his IP sales. So that's what Lippu was watching. And then Lippu was making connection Cadence is going to get into IP business, which else, this is the better company to go and buy. Every year he used to come and tell, hey, why don't you take some money from us? Okay. So this is what is reality. And there are many, many cosmic circuits. There are some people, I think we have Dr. Shankara is here from Terminus Circuits. We have many, many companies, okay? After that, Silicon and Beyond was acquired by Synopsys like that. So there are lots and lots of success stories that's already there. We just need to do a few more, that's all. But look at the comparison. This is the matured US market. This company is also actually present in India. But I wanted to contrast this, what happens there, and how that ecosystem investors are believing somebody there. The same belief we have to translate from, bringing it from outside India to India. A cross-continental edge computing solutions venture. Some of you will be able to guess what it is. We'll give it as a quiz question. $155 million raise so far, 10 investors. And I've named the investors. Maybe from the investors somebody can figure out. And what is their annual revenue to cumulative capital ratio? We don't know, right? We will be able to figure it out. I'm just trying to contrast this. So 155 million, which is almost closer to 1,200 crore. And you saw the previous one, it's only 40 crore. Okay. So that is what I wanted to convey, that capital is not available for even deserving startups, which is what Ashish echoed. So that is the problem which government and private bodies, associations are wanting to solve. And once we recognize the problem, people say that if you accept the problem, it is 50% solved. So we have accepted the problem, we started making some moves, government is doing a lot of work. So we are 75%, but remaining 25% we have to solve. We have some plans for that also. So recipe for success, this is what I would like all of you to carry this. Commitment for 5 to 10 years. The hardware startup is almost like moving your bags and living in ICU in the hospital for next 5 years. Okay, be prepared for that. Okay. Then $1 to $2 million you should be able to raise as a seed capital with your strength. I mean, when Sankhya Labs was raising money, I think Parag was able to raise the first million probably over, he was telling about the trip to Coimbatore. Okay, he was able to raise that because that was his reputation and pedigree, because we acquired his company earlier. So he was telling that, hey, I can build acquisitions, I can build exits for investors. The investor in his previous venture was so happy to get returns when we were acquiring them. And $1 to $3 million revenue rich and business plan. There should be dedicated people only focused on the revenue. Okay. See, even if you're building an associate product, look for, I think he told, is there an IP game coming? Okay. Is there some kind of a product development, big like $500,000 or a 1 million, 2 million order, project actually. You should embark into it and do that. And ecosystem also is evolving compared to olden days. We have DLI scheme. I think we can complain about all the schemes, but how many of people get involved? That's what SFAL is a 56 crore venture funded by government of Karnataka. We have so far spent probably about 14 or 16 crores. It's a 5-year plan. And we are able to create support 9 good startups engaged and working with us. So we are telling the government that we are creating value. Government is believing that. Government wants to support more and more of that. That is why, in fact, SFAL scheme was actually modeled, DLI scheme was modeled around SFAL. Okay? And even in SFAL, we don't directly give money. It was more of infrastructure support. That is what Ashish was pointing it out. Because a lot of these people actually were part of the inputs, giving inputs to influence SFAL as well as DLI. So he was telling, the money which should be given is still taken as a reimbursement. That means I spend $1, then I'll get 50 cents back. But I think one thing I didn't want to agree with him was, even that, if you talk to investors or investor background people like Satish, they will explain to you how to use this reimbursement also as a big plus when you're talking to investors. For example, a 50 cents coming back from government is your future revenue. So you have to present it to the investors like that. That is what is your business acumen comes actually. So it is like a guaranteed 50 rupees will come for every 100 rupee I have invested. So you can put it as a future revenue. That money is not available with me, but you give me the capital, I'll run like this, but I can get 50 rupees from my capital coming as revenue from the government. That is what government wants you to think and project it actually. So you can't say that no, only reimbursements is available. That is where I have a disconnect with Ashish. We are educating people like Ashish also. By the way, their company is also in our ecosystem. And never underplay the service. In fact, this is something we have done really wrong. In fact, as an ESDM ecosystem, this industry was largely built by service ecosystem. And then we learned from service. Either we serve to ourselves, like MNCs are service to the foreign bodies, right? But we learned a lot of things. I came out of TI to start my startup journey. And we sold that company for $450 million. Okay. And by the way, we were the first one got listed in NASDAQ, not Freshworks. A lot of people don't even know that. We got listed in NASDAQ even before ADR listing by Infosys. We did that in 2 years, actually. We used to do 6 silicon every year, right out of Indiranagar. So 6, 7 houses. We did that. And some of those people, the senior people, are actually entrepreneurs. If you talk to Hemant Malapur, who is Sankhya, one of the founder, one of his chip sold for 179 million lifetime revenue for the company, for us. That chip was done by 14 engineers working out of 12th Main, HAL second stage, Indiranagar, one house. And we used to connect these houses using Ethernet, cables. And the electricity man used to come and cut it actually, because we used to run house to house. So we used to manage him actually, hey, don't cut it, because houses were like 1 block away like that. So we used to tell them, otherwise it's very, very hard to put the wiring and all that stuff. So a lot of things are possible. That's what I wanted to convey. And by the way, someone asked about whether all the people will come into ESDM or not. It doesn't matter actually. The 2% of the best only will come to ESDM. That is good enough actually. So we should not worry too much about that factor. So already the demonstrated success, all these people have done this. So you can see the demonstrated success. And all these people, some of you have seen today talking like Staradian, and you will be listening to Caligo people also. By the way, this Lightspeed AI is the company which has returned exits to us, okay? It's a photonics company, really good company. In fact, Parag talked about they're flipping from India to Singapore, and also they're setting up in US. So they wanted to give an exit to us. Okay, so we discussed in our this thing and it got accepted. Okay, so it may be hard to fail in hardware. Okay, but I think this is thanks to Gaurab Banerjee, who is going to be my next speaker. He said a dead elephant is also very valuable. Okay, so there is a rule that the residual value of any ESDM startup, please remember this, will be equal to 2x the capital raised. So now somebody can only question you that why is this so many years it takes to get a 2x. That's what your investor will question. But you have a conviction, and then you convince your investors that you should, the 2 years or 3 years or 4 years is enough to get 2x capital. I told you, Sankhya Labs returned for some people 2x only, right? For some people it was 40x, for some people it was 10x. It is possible, okay? 2x, if you put it in a repo rate or you put it in a bank, it's a 6.5% is the repo rate interest, and bank interest, money doubles only in 5 years, right? So there are answers actually. So if you think deeply, so hardware startups is done by really hard-nosed people, okay? So I will stop here and then give the opportunity to my fellow speaker. And I want to lead that why actually Gaurav is also speaking with me, because we felt that there were less number of startups in ESDM space. Now we are embarking into how do we manufacture startups? How do we create startups? So Gaurav is going to tell how such startups are actually, and we have the best of the best academic community in the country. Almost every IITs, every IISc is working with at least one startup or many startups. So he's going to connect these dots, and this is where probably we will get our next 100 startups or even more ESDM startups. More than that, even if any startup is not connected with them today, we encourage them, you should connect with an academic institute of any merit actually. Right now, for example, SFAL works with IIT Dharwad, IIT Indore, IISc, IIT Chennai, IIT Delhi, I mean, you name it. And in colleges only, you get 3,000 employees without salary, right? In every college environment, you have 3,000 employees, there is no need to pay salaries. Because they are available 24/7 to you, the hostelites are available to you. So they are at the disposal of the professors and college management. So like during pandemic, the lot of this Kalyana Mandapams are converted into many things. Actually, we can convert a lot of this, our college campuses, into probably the best of the best startup manufacturing factories, instead of only manufacturing jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Muthuji, and it's a great pleasure being here today. I can tell you one thing, on days on which you're at your lowest, if you have a 5-minute conversation with Muthuji, you'll be all fired up, right? So that's the way it works, and there have been many occasions in my own career here, especially because Muthuji has been working with me indirectly or directly, right, for the last 4 or 5 years before the pandemic. And on many occasions, on days I've felt really down and no, this cannot happen, some inner voice tells me, talk to Muthuji, give him a call, right? And within 5 or 10 minutes, I'm all fired up. So I mean, it's great being here. If I can get my slides up, please. So while the slides are coming up, I have to tell you something. About 20 years ago, when I had joined Intel Research and Development, I used to work in a product group at Intel, and then I moved to Intel R&D in Portland, Oregon. And I had a fiery conversation with my boss in my cubicle. You know how it works in the cube form, right? You typically, when you want to fight with your boss, you go to a conference room, right? So, I mean, we all know that. So, but I had a very fiery conversation with my boss because it started off being a technical discussion, and we were both very passionate, right, about the technologies. And I'd worked on silicon germanium, right, and as a part of my graduate research. And I was very passionate about SiGe being the technology, right, to help wireless communication. Whereas his take was that, no, we are Intel. Everything we do is CMOS, right? CMOS is our religion. And so we were fighting over bipolar versus CMOS. I don't know if you're an old player in the industry, you'll remember in the early 2000s, that's what we used to fight about, right? Bipolar versus CMOS. And I was working in a CMOS company, so it was very hard for me to fight on behalf of bipolar. So we had a fiery discussion. At the end of that, my boss said, Gaurav, I would have loved to fire you today. Of course, he didn't mean it. He said, Gaurav, I would have loved to fire you today, but I cannot do that because all the people at Intel who know bipolar are either retired or dead, right? So, and then shortly afterwards, there was a gentleman who used to sit 4 or 5 cubicles away from me with a very cynical sense of humor. So he peeped into my cubicle after my boss walked out, and he said, Gaurav, I guess you have bipolar disorder, right? So, in fact, I do have bipolar disorder, right? Because you can see I have 2 roles that I'm trying to play right now. I've been an academic for the last 12 years after I came back to India. And recently I started a company called Agya Vision to take a technology which came out of my lab, and now we are trying to commercialize it. So you will hear a lot of this industry academia thing today in my talk because I'm going to talk about translational research. And I'll just briefly define translational research for you. So in a nutshell, translational research essentially means that you translate something that you developed in academia into a commercial product, right? So converting a product and make it beneficial to mankind. It's very different and yet very similar to deep technology, which is more of a jargon used in the startup investment world, right? Where people say that, okay, deep technology means that, it's not shallow, right? So a significant amount of time has been spent on deep tech. From an academic perspective, I can tell you that everything we do is deep tech for us, right? Because we are trying to do research, and most of the time our objective is not to translate, but to make a modification to the state of the art so we can publish it, right, in academia and share it with the rest of the people out there. But some of the time, we feel that it's important for us to do translational research, especially people who do engineering work, right? They have this They feel that it's some kind of a duty. So I'll give you a historical perspective. When did all of this start, right? This academic innovation and our academia's role in innovation. So all of us know that Silicon Valley has been this beacon, this guiding light of whatever has happened in technology development, right, over the last 100 years or so. Now, all of you know that Silicon Valley is called Silicon Valley because of the first wave that came out, right, in the early 50s or so. Initially, Silicon Valley could have become Germanium Valley, right? So it's because the first transistor was a point contact transistor, but then it ended up becoming Silicon Valley, and the semiconductors wave was the first wave, right? And after that, we had the computers, right, which were enabled by semiconductors. We had the internet, and many of us have actually probably intercepted, those of us who are old enough in here, may have intercepted this during the internet revolution and then the wireless communication and AI ML. And today, all of these are sort of, getting into a mishmash. Although semiconductors are responsible for the Silicon Valley, they're still very active, as we know. We are talking about the ESDM ecosystem here. But there is one secret wave that not many people know about, and that's the defense wave, right? So Silicon Valley was not started by silicon people. It was started by defense people. And that's what I'm going to talk about, because some of the technologies, so if you think about what happened during the Second World War, right? Second World War ended in 1945. The first bipolar transistor was demonstrated in Bell Labs on Christmas Eve, 1947, right? And so the real semiconductor revolution started then. Jack Kilby did his integrated circuit in TI much later, right? And this is how the whole chip design industry started off. But if you look at the origins, right? It all started during the Second World War. Three of the key technologies that really won the Second World War were the radar, right? So the Germans had an extensive radar network. They would pick up any plane coming across the English Channel, right, on a bombing run. And they had very sophisticated techniques for long-range surveillance with very primitive radars. They could, hand you over from long-range surveillance to immediate tracking, and they even had radars on their airplanes. Very rudimentary, right? Today we get thrilled when we talk about AWACS. And the Brits also had a radar. And the Germans thought that the Brits were too primitive to have a radar. And they had a radar system called the chain home radar that did not look like a radar at all. So the German bombers were always very surprised when they crossed the English Channel that there was a squadron of planes waiting for them. They were like, how do they know, right? So because the British also had radar, and they did their best to keep that a secret, right? Also, what the Allied forces did is that they used to fly planes over Germany during the Second World War. Very interesting story, right? They would strip down and essentially the electronics and listen to enemy communication. That's electronic warfare. They had the proximity fuse, which I'll talk about in some other occasion maybe. But two failures, right, that people don't talk about much that went on to become success were the Enigma machine, right, which Alan Turing cracked and started the birth of the computer science revolution, and the V2 rocket, right, that the Germans used to fire. These were truly unguided missiles, right? They used to fall anywhere. And the Germans still got it, and this is what started the space tech industry, right? So during the World War, something very interesting happened. Before the war, there was Dr. Vannevar Bush at MIT, who was a very prolific scientist, right? And exactly about 100 years ago, Dr. Vannevar Bush started a company that ended up becoming Raytheon today, which is one of the biggest defense manufacturers. This was the example of first ever faculty entrepreneurship, unless there was something else that I don't know about, right? So he was a faculty member. He's very well known for two of his illustrious students. One of them I'm sure everybody here has heard about, and that's Claude Shannon, right? If you've worked on communication, you know about Shannon's capacity theorem, and Claude Shannon was Dr. Vannevar Bush's PhD student. The other very illustrious student was Dr. Frederick Terman, who shortly after the war, and they'd all worked on the technologies I showed you, shortly after the war, he moved to Stanford in Silicon Valley. And in Stanford, he started what's really the bricks and mortar of translational research. His first couple of students were Hewlett and Packard, and everybody knows about them, the company they founded, which ended up making Silicon Valley, right? So some of the key things, and I won't really take too much time because I know we are hard-pressed on time. Some of the things, Dr. Thurman's strategy contained at Stanford was really about graduate students being enabled to start their companies, right? Professors encouraged to consult and have board seats, technology transfer, IP licensing. You have a deep technology that's in academia. How do you enable it to become a product, right? And then more changes happened over the world, right, in the coming decades where we structured all of this. So today, every academic institute has an incubator, and then they work with incubators like SFAL, for example, right? So there is an extension of that space. And a lot of things really came out of what he did, Dr. Thurman did. And on the other side in Silicon Valley, you had these people, right? You had Shockley, who invented the transistor, was an excellent, brilliant scientist, okay, and a total failure of a manager, right? So this is another thing when you do a startup company like he did, you have to know how to keep your flock together, right? And so he was terrible at keeping his flock together, so 8 people left. They were called the treacherous 8, and then they started Fairchild Semiconductor, many of us know, and then they went on to spawn a whole industry, right? With, Intel was one of the products. The other product not many people talk about, right, is Kleiner Perkins. Kleiner Perkins was founded again by Eugene Kleiner, and today it's one of the largest VCs in Silicon Valley, right? So very quickly, there's a look at all the Fair children, right, that came out of Fairchild, and Stanford at the same time, where all of this other translational research was happening. Together, they have created, I'd say only Fairchild has created about $2.1 trillion of worth, right? And so it's important to have an academic institution that sits in the middle of your startup ecosystem. This is the US startup ecosystem, and you can see that around every major center of innovation, right, you have academic institutions, and it's very important for this cross-fertilization to happen in the context of translational research. And this virus has spread, if you want to call it a virus. It's gone from the United States to the rest of the world, where around every major center of commerce, you'll find a major university that interacts, and this is what translational research is all about. And we are very lucky that Bangalore was identified as one such ecosystem. We are one such ecosystem, and our best kept secret so far has been IISc, because we like to hide in a forest in North Bangalore. But you can work with us. I'll just briefly tell you about my journey, right? I worked in the industry for a long time at Intel and Qualcomm, then came to IISc about 12 years ago and built a research group. And very recently, I've done a startup based on some of the research, translational research. So everybody likes to show off their family photographs, right? Look at my grandkids, look at my kids. So us chip designers like to show off the chips we've worked on, right? So I started my career with the Pentium 4 processor. We had 300 engineers. So if you ask me what did I contribute, I'll have to look at a microscope, right? Maybe use an electron microscope to show you, but very little, small analog and mixed signal circuits. I ended my career in the industry with the industry's first built-in self-test system that I integrated. That's the lower right-hand corner. And I led the integration of that at Qualcomm. And in between, I worked on a whole bunch of research and product chips. And when I moved to IISc, one of the things I insisted to my own students was, during your PhD, you have to fabricate a chip. Generally, we fabricate them in Taiwan, right? So there was some talk about Taiwan. So I'll tell you one thing. For me as a chip designer, Dr. Morris Chang is my hero, right? And I think he should be your hero too, because he democratized the fabrication of chips, right? Because previously only the Intels and the TIs could fabricate their chips because they had fabs. He enabled this democratization. He took the fab to Taiwan, he founded TSMC, and he enabled all of us, little fries, even academic institutes like me, to go ahead and fabricate chips. So this is what we've been able to do, many, many chips in our group over the last 12 years. And we've built a full infrastructure. Someday if you visit IISc, give me a call. Maybe I can show you my lab where we have a full probe station, we fabricate chips, we measure them, we test them. And I mostly have been recently working on radars on chip, which is what Agya Vision is all about. And these are my students without whom all of this would not have been possible, right? So they play a very key role. And they're all at major companies. I also have a bunch of fired up students working with me currently. And I'm very grateful to my sponsors, supporters who've funded me in various ways. So I will show you a couple of examples of what sort of chips we have translated from our group, right? We have done a lot of research chips, but the first translated research from my group was a wideband RF amplifier. Now those of you, I talked about military research, so those of you who know about military research would have heard about a distributed amplifier, right? Because they give you the ability to have a very wide bandwidth. You can listen to enemy communication across a wide bandwidth, and we built an IISc prototype, right, which was a pin-for-pin replacement, supposed to be, for a gallium arsenide chip. And we had fantastic numbers, performance numbers on this chip. And also we got a lot of support from Bharat Electronics, which I have a lot of respect for BEL because these guys have really enabled us to do a lot of things by helping us when they're not really required to. So we transferred the technology to BEL and some press. Then we recently developed a through-wall radar on chip. So a chip that's able to look through a wall or look down, right, and do ground penetration. And there are so many other applications of this technology. So it's a very small chip, smaller than a grain of rice. And I can't talk much about it because we are in the process of, this is how we are testing it. And we've done 2 rounds of silicon, by the way. So, you could raise the technology readiness level of a technology significantly by doing academic research. So now we have actually built a prototype around this chip. And that's what Agya Vision is all about, right? This is our startup. And so the key learnings that I would share with you is that if you have the right infrastructure, you can develop semiconductor chips in India, outperform people, right? The translation is a little difficult, but what I have done, interestingly, today is I've taken matters in my own hand, right? In the sense that when it gets to be too much, you have to actually do a startup. Of course, you want to be in your lab doing experiments, but at some point you have to commercialize, right? So another thing I want to talk about is Project Prana, which we did as an emergency ventilator during the pandemic. We finished the ventilator in approximately 35 days, right? It was very aggressive. The team was all volunteers, and essentially, this is how it works, right? You take compressed air and mix it, air and oxygen. We did the pneumatics from scrap. We did the electronics. This was not chip design. This was all about making a system in India from scratch during a pandemic when we were in the middle of a lockdown, right? And we built a ventilator that was ready for deployment in an ICU. 35 days, right? And so this is where we learned a lot of things. I won't really share all of them because of the time constraint, but you can do it in India. That's what I'd like to tell you. And so all of these technologies have had various readiness levels, right? And what happens is there are different reasons why which you will not be able to translate most of the technologies, but you will be. So today I've sort of risen on the stack. And my latest effort is to see if I can make it successful as a commercial venture. And so I just want to show you this is what happens in academic research, and this is not what happens, right? Because these are very nice diagrams to share in a public forum and say that I have 2 models. I could start and build layers of different types of capability in my company, right? Or I could start proliferating my ideas, work with the local industry. If you are local industry and you're looking at collaborating with academia, right? You could probably look at the model on the right, or you could look at the model on the left, right? But it's not that simple, right? Those of you who are doing entrepreneurship already know, I don't need to tell you. But essentially what really hurts us in translational research is what we call the valley of death, right? So today if I have a technology which is deep tech, I've got a working chip, okay, I'm ready with a prototype. But by the time the industry gets interested in what I do, which is on the right, funding is available, the market is ready, and customers are lined up, most of the people are in the valley of death, right? My researchers, including myself, will lose interest. The students will graduate and get jobs. And of course, other technical members will move on. So this is a challenge we have to face. This is specific to the semiconductor industry that we face every single day, right? And I think Muthuji was talking about some of them. We should look at it positively. We should not look at it negatively in the sense that, this is an obstacle. Instead of looking at the valley of death and that scary-looking skeleton at the bottom, you should probably look at the bridge at the top, right? And that's the way we can make things happen. And I'll just conclude in 2 slides. deep tech investment landscape, right? This is what we face in terms of investment. You can see that I have a technology readiness level at the bottom, right? When the idea is very early on, unfortunately, you're not going to get investors, okay? Because if you have a really difficult to implement sort of idea, the only people who will help you are the government or investors with deep wallets, right? And then if you really want to, if you raise your TRL, eventually you will get into the conventional support system with large VCs, angels, and small VCs. But when you're starting off, you have to find people who will invest in technology and expect nothing in return, right? The cost of capital for you should be zero when you're doing that. And only the government and big organizations like charitable trusts will be able to do that. And finally, I don't know, some of it is blocked, but this is my last slide. So I just wanted to share that what do you need to do? Not everybody here is a part of the academic ecosystem, right? What do you need to do to work with us? So everybody has a role to play, right? We in academia can break up the boundaries between, what is a project for us, a research project and a startup. Investors, I have had several visits from people. Sometimes a VC or an angel investor comes and just, talks to me in my office, just to find out what sort of technologies we are working on. Very casual conversation. I've had several of these. One gentleman came and said, let's go to the cafeteria and have a cup of coffee, right? Or the restaurant. So it happens. You can, if you're from the industry, you're an engineer or you're a business person, you can identify these opportunities with academia very early on. Go talk to the professors. Not everybody is interested in doing a company, right? So I'm more of a reluctant entrepreneur, or I was. Now I have jumped into the swimming pool, right? So I have to stay afloat. And then, of course, so if you do all of these things, if you start working in parallel, right, then you will make engineering, fundraising, sales, revenue generation, all of these parallel instead of serial. And this is going to accelerate the pace at which you can take deep technology and commercialize it. So thank you.